black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and for those of you who are new to the show, the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent and what we've contributed to not only this country but to world history. And the missing part of world history is African history, at least for the last 400 years or 500 years that we've been placed into the diaspora. And another thing that I like to express when I talk on these shows is that through dialogue, there can be a shift in consciousness. And when there's a shift in consciousness, there also is a shift in your worldview. And to that point of why it is necessary to correct errors where errors are found and introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction, I'm going to be talking based on two books that I've read and I'm familiar with. Some of you might be familiar with at least one of these books or both of these books. One is by the great Guyanese teacher who published this book called Stolen Legacies back in 1954. And I'm going to place that there. Yeah, 1954, that states with evidence all the way back then that the thing that we are taught in the school systems for the last 200 years was the fact that Western culture came out of Roman culture, which came out of Greek culture, and the Greeks are where human beings start having these philosophical thoughts, where the term philosophy came from and the discipline of the philosophy came from. And that idea has been pushed for hundreds of years. But there are many books, but I chose to narrow down to these two books for your purposes of reading. This is a wonderful book. It's a small book, but it's packed with all kinds of information by this great teacher, Dr. George G.M. James is his name. And he was a teacher of logic, mathematics. He spoke Greek, he spoke Latin, and he understood the Masonic system. And he wrote all his stuff that he learned about this in this book. And he came to the conclusion, like many people, including to many scholars today, that the Greeks were not the originators of what the system we call philosophy is. Even they said it came from the ancient Egyptians. Again, I'm here to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction. And this is another book that came out, I think, in 1987. And this is the book called Black Athenia by another, a white professor from Cornell University, Dr. Martin Burnell, who just recently died, I think, in 2013. And Dr. James died about 2 years after this book was published in 1956. Again, it was published in 1954. He died 2 years later. Some say mysteriously in 1956. But before I go on with the information that I got from these books, I want to start with a foundational ideas that come from another great scholar that I want to introduce you to, and that's this gentleman right here. His name is Theophile Obenga. Now, many of you might not be familiar with him, but he's a world-renowned linguist. And some of you might be familiar with the name of Dr. Obenga. I used to talk about in the show when I talked about the great another great scholar, Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop. Now, I mentioned the Cairo Symposium that was established in 1974, where Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop was there representing the black perspective. But the person that was with him in that symposium in 1974, which was put together by UNESCO, United Nations Education and Scientific and Cultural Commission, part of the UN, and the purpose of the symposium was to put to rest the question, were the Egyptians black? Okay, and they gathered in Cairo in 1974 all the greatest scholars of that time. And guess who was there with Sheikh Anta Diop? The only two black faces out of the 20-something anthropologists, Egyptologists, historians, iconographers. These are the people who study the vases and statues. All these great scholars, and the only two that came prepared, according to the UNESCO when they wrote their report afterwards. This was these two men, him with the linguistic proof, and Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop with the all the other types of scientific proof, including a way of counting the melanin of the Egyptian mummies. It's called the melanin dosage test. That's how brilliant this brother is. So I want to start with his idea. Where he also, as a linguist, go with the words and because words is how we communicate with each other. Words is how we express ideas and concepts. And he wants to show that the concept of philosophy, he shows it linguistically. He's a master. I also want to say that he's a master of Greek. He's a master at Latin. He's a master of ancient Egyptian script, and he could read. He also, like they always say, he reads the walls. He could go to any of the tombs and temples, any of the scrolls, and fluently read what the West call hieroglyphics, or what the ancients call the Meta Nature. And this is what he had to say about some of his findings. It is from pure prejudice that we are taught to believe in the Western world that the philosophical centuries of humanity only began with the Greeks in the 5th century BC. This prejudice implies that other ancient people, much older than the Greeks, did not engage in any intellectual or speculative thoughts amongst themselves. For philosophy can simply be defined as systematic, reflective thinking. And this arrogance that he's talking about, it came out in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. What was going on in the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s? There were people like me being kidnapped and by the millions being brought over. And to justify this inhumane type of activities, they had to show that we were not greater than the beast. Okay, we were called chattel. Chattel means the movement of property. Okay, movable property. That's what we were already see. We weren't even considered human beings. Now, Dr. Obenga also went on to say this quote I would like to put up there. Okay, he quotes an ancient Egyptian text. Like I said, he mastered this language called the Stele of Intef. The Stele of Intef. I'll talk about what a stele is. It's just, you ever seen those slabs of stone in Moses movies that stone where things are written on them, the Ten Commandments and stuff like that? That's an Egyptian stele. And they use that to show great events or praise the pharaohs or bring out, talk about certain kind of spiritual concepts. And this stele, which comes from the Middle Kingdom, which goes from 2040 to 782, long before there was a Greece. This is what they said, which he captioned as the first definition of a philosopher in history. This is in the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. Okay, and he actually translated these words in the article this came from a German scholar named Helmut Brunner, who found that stele and that writing. Okay, this is the definition of a philosopher that was written by the ancient Egyptians way before in 2000, between 2040 to 1782 BC. Okay, there was no Greece then, or no classical Greece at that time. He is the one whose heart is informed about these things which would otherwise be ignored. The one who is clear-sighted when he's deep in a problem. The one who is moderate in his actions, who penetrates ancient writings, who advice is sought after to unravel complications, who is really wise, who has instructed his own heart, who stays awake at night and looks for the right path to take, basically. Okay, this is what the first definition of a philosopher by the ancient Egyptians, okay, who literally, by what I've been studying, taught the Greeks in what we now know misnomen and miseducated as Greek philosophy. Let's go on to another point that I want to make. This is an image of a stela, okay? Like I said, is what they ascribe good events. Another thing about what Dr. Obenga, before I go on, I want to make sure that you understood. He believed that the Egyptians were the teachers of the Greeks. They said them themselves, and I'll prove that as we go on in this show. But the word philosophy, okay, that we are taught is a Greek word. Being the brilliant linguist that he is, and the first person to even come up with this concept, because philosophy is made of two words, philos and sophos, okay? Philos and sophos. Philos means the love of, and sophos means a wisdom, the love of wisdom, okay? He scoured many Greek etymological dictionaries. Etymology is the study of the origin of words. Where did words originate? Where did they come from? And there's a dictionary, they'll tell you certain words in whatever language. And there's many different etymological dictionaries. And he scoured all of them. And guess what he found? That the word philos and the word sophos were not even Greek. In fact, there is no Greek origin of those words, okay? And also, it's not found in the Indo-European family that the Greek language is put in Western educational system, okay? So you have two words that are combined to create philosophy, but they're words that don't even belong in the Greek language. Where did they come from? Dr. Obenga says, well, let's look at their teachers. That means the Egyptians. Let's go on. This is the book that everybody should have on their shelf, okay? The cover is different, but the information that I'm basing a lot of this information on is well documented. Footnotes are there. He'll tell you where the source books that he got the information from, okay? And he's going to bring up a lot of the points I'm going to bring up. This is Dr. George G.M. James, okay? This brother, like I said earlier, taught logic, taught mathematics, spoke Greek, spoke Latin, okay? And taught at a black institution, HBCU, at the University of Arkansas, Pine Bluff, okay? Great scholar, and we should recognize him and honor him like all these other great scholars I tried to introduce you to. Let's go on to the next one. The next book is another book that came out in 1987, written by a professor at Cornell University. His name is Martin Bernal. That's Martin Bernal, okay? He kind of let out some secrets that most of the academia in that type of environment claim they don't say that they're wrong when they come across people who speak the truth or just do the scholarship for scholarship's sake. They said it's controversial. They use these terms controversial. When you ever heard them say that Dr. Clark or Dr. Ivan Van Sertima or Dr. Joseph Ben Yakin, all these great scholars who spend 30, 40 years and 50 years of their lives coming up with this knowledge, they always use the term, these are controversial, but they never said they're wrong because it doesn't fit the narrative of Western thought being, and the time of reason, the age of reason, all this stuff to make this, like Dr. Obenga said, this prejudice to the people that they had to define as animals or savages that look like me and look like many of you out there, but come from ancient societies that goes back thousands of years before there was even anything called the West. Okay, and we got to break through that nonsense that's being taught to our children. Okay, especially with Black History Month, and I'm wearing this outfit for Black History Month for the knowledge. So let's go on to some more information. These are some of the philosophers I'm going to be basically mentioning their names. So I want you to understand. The first one is Thales. He's supposed to be the first of the philosophers. Actually, to me, it's Pythagoras, and you'll understand why. And these are the years they were born and lived. And this is the period of time. This is Socrates, and Socrates, the one most people are familiar with. Okay, and then you have Plato. His real name was Aristocles. That's his real name. That's what he was born with. Plato was a name that, a nickname that was given, meaning broad. I don't know if he had a broad head or what. Aristotle and Herodotus. I'm pretty much going to be focusing around those gentlemen. And these are names, and this is the period of time when, according to Western teaching, that this thing called philosophy took shape. That all of a sudden, all the people prior to the 600s and the 400s in other parts of the world, there was no wisdom thinking in China, or the Native Americans here wasn't building temples pyramids that rival the ones in Egypt, which requires mathematics and certain types of logical thinking and mathematics. But in the arrogance of the Western teachings is that only these guys, for some reason, and there's no explanation of how they came about this knowledge. Now, the Greeks themselves tell you where they come from. If you read them, which I'll show as we go on, they'll tell you that they got it from the Egyptians, that it was the Egyptians who taught them, who brought it in, especially Pythagoras. Let's go on, the Pythagorean theory. I just show you some images of who these people all actually look like. That's Thales of Miletus. Okay, next up here. Okay, that's Pythagoras right there. Okay, that's what he looked like. That's the bust of him. Okay, the next one that we'll go through would be Isocrates. Isocrates is important because he wrote a biography of Pythagoras, and he said in his writing, the Buris, B-U-R-I-S, that he went to Egypt and stayed for 22 years. I'm not saying it. Dr. Cornell, Dr. Martin is not saying it. Dr. James is not saying it. He's saying that. One of the early philosophers and people, biographers of Pythagoras. Let's go on. Many of you are familiar with this person, Socrates. He's the teacher of Plato. He didn't get along with the Athenian government, and we'll kind of focus on that as we go on. But I want to show you who some of these people that's constantly being taught. If you took a philosophy class or even Google something, a saying. Now, he was the one who supposedly came with the idea of the word know thyself. Look, and you'll see it in the intro to my show, know thyself. But those words are found on on Egyptian temples all over Kemet or Egypt during the time long before Socrates. Yet he is the one that's given credit for it. Again, everything that has been taught since the 1700s and 1800s and well into even to this day has been wrong when it comes to who created this thing called philos, Sophie. Okay? That's not even a Greek word. And if the Greek word is not true, how can that concept of philosophy be used as a Greek idea when the word is not even, they don't even use a word that's found in their language? Come on. Let's go on to who's next. This is, everybody knows his student Plato. Okay, that's Plato right there. And then after him, Plato's student, Aristotle. And this man is interesting. To me, he's one of the greatest, he plagiarized so much from those temples. Okay, he went into Egypt with Alexander. Alexander, being that he's in control of Egypt at the time in the 330s, he died in 322. Okay, and Alexander, he changed the Library of Alexander into a research, and his research center, and his students at the time, they were sent out all over the captured Egyptian country at that time of Alexander, and they were gathering all the scrolls and the books, and he is credited of making all kinds of tomes. Now, before he went into Egypt with Alexander, okay, when he was there in Rome, he traveled around, and one of the places he supposedly came to was not found any evidence that he even had all these ideas that he is given in his book Metaphysics that came out after he went into Egypt. Prior to that, and he died almost 10 years after he got into Egypt, and he wrote all those, I don't know, 17, 18 different theses and works and science and all those things that would take one person a whole lifetime to do. But he supposedly created all these things while he was in charge of the library at Alexander and had access to all the Egyptian books. That's what they want us to believe, that he wrote all these great pieces of literature. So he plagiarized a lot of that stuff. I hate to say it, it burst some people's bubble, but proved me wrong. Let's go on to the next verse. This is one, he's considered, again, another Greek, but at least he was an honest Greek who went to Egypt during the time of the Persians. People don't realize that you've seen the movie 300, where you had the Spartans and, at Thermopylae and, fighting to the death. Well, that was the Peloponnesian War. But but they don't show you that the Persians did win. The Persians did conquer Greece, okay? And it wasn't until the Persians conquered Greece. There were Greeks going over to Egypt prior to that, okay? There was that Mediterranean area was full of commerce, but they were limited to where they could go when they went into Egypt. The priests wasn't going to let them go traipse all over. Okay, there's certain places like Hierapolis and places like that, or Memphis, where they could go. But it wasn't until the Persians conquered that they opened up all of Greece to the Greeks. And Herodotus went over there, but he went over there to learn. And he wrote what he saw. And he's called the father of history for that. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So I want to show you all the connections to where all these philosophers, okay, Pythagoras, Thales, Socrates, even later on Herodotus and all these other folks all had connections to Egypt. Okay, they all went there, or they all learned something from that. And they have no problem telling you this. That's what you must understand. Now, I'm going to continue this in the next show, but I want you to understand that. I want you to understand that philosophy, philos, had nothing to do with Greeks, other than they were taught by people that looked like us. And that's hard for a lot of the scholars in the 1700s and the 1800s when Egyptology, after they found the Rosetta Stone, when Napoleon and his troops found it in the Egyptian village of Rosetta, okay? That goes back to the time of one of the Bartholomews, I think Philadelphus. But he was also a descendant of the Greeks after Alexander. So the people of the pyramid builders that look like us, once all these invasions came in, okay, as Dr. Clark would say, the light of the great Kemet, or Egypt, at the time of the pyramid builders and the great scholarship started to dim when these Greeks and the Assyrians and the Persians and all these invaders came in. The light started to dim because all these outsiders, who most of them plundered because of the great wealth and they were in awe of what they saw. If you go even at their ruined state, they're still magnificent. If you go there today, the pyramids and the temples there. But you can imagine when they were in their full bloom, they drew all these outsiders. The only ones I got to give props to, even though because they copy everything, was the Greeks. They admitted, hey, we learned from you, we copy you, but yet you are showing Greek columns, supposedly. They got that from Kemet, okay? Certain things, everything. The Greeks copied it, and then, of course, the Romans, who always, Johnny come lately, copied the Greeks, all right? And took from the Etruscans, okay? Again, this so-called Western culture that is constantly being pushed based on racist concepts. I want to emphasize that. This came out of a time when people were being kidnapped and brought here as permanent chattel, okay? But I'm gonna stop right here, and then I'm gonna continue on in the next show. So until next time, peace, Hotep.